All
Okay,
right.
so
Hey, folks.
go on then. So I'm here with Benny, and we were just talking about the possible opportunity of meeting up in Europe this summer to partake of a residency program together. And we were discussing what kinds of collaboration we would like to bring to said residency program, along the lines of sharing several different talks, workshops of different kinds about the content that has kept our, I would say, in some ways, friendship alive for circa the last 4 years, in very different parts of the world. So, what do you think, Benny, are the main things that we would like to cover, present, like what topics feel important to share about and why?
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up. Um, who is this for, by the way?
I don't know. We'll find out. YouTube, I guess.
Okay.
Let me switch to like this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you set the context kind of. There's a residency program with the people at Retribalize.ai, right? And that name itself, Retribalize, seems like one of the most relevant and important kind of indispensable topics of our time because it's the other side of the coin of the loneliness epidemic. And I don't know if it's just my biases of feeling so connected and passionately drawn towards the loneliness epidemic, but I tend to see it everywhere. It's very much shaped my perception. Um, so many people who I talk to, it seems like their suffering is so intimately connected to the absence of the value that tribes bring, all the needs that are unmet because we no longer are living in those evolutionary environments. And so, evolutionary mismatch theory is essentially this idea that culture and technology evolve much faster than our biology does. And so, the difference between the environments we're born into and live in today relative to the environments that we evolved to live in, that that gap um, causes really much of our psychological suffering and which leads to nth order effects of so much physical suffering and violence. So I think the loneliness epidemic, the need to retribalize, and not those things in isolation, but like how our individualistic society is very compatible with the current global extractive capitalistic model where every single human depends on a market and that market is running the infinite growth on a finite planet dynamics. So we've actually like been born into a system where in some way we're forced to depend on a system that's eating the planet and eating itself from within. And some people call this the machine, the mega machine, Moloch, different things. So the meta crisis, and if you're watching and you don't know what the meta crisis is, you have hours of content to consume, i.e. Daniel Schmachtenberger. um, so I think this idea of needing to retribalize in the context of the meta crisis and the threats we face to our humanity, right? So there's these kind of twin failure modes of catastrophic risk, which just wipes us all out. And that became possible a blink ago, which was after World War II, or I guess during World War II. Um, and the other is the dystopian, like the death of our humanity. Like it's the death of humanity or the death of our humanity, which is like, you know, this kind of like techno transhumanism movement who and people who adopt technology, um, power is conferred to. So there's that kind of asymmetry. And the people who have the power driving the evolution of technology are kind of just like have mommy and daddy issues. I don't know what's going on, but they are they're the underlying philosophies that are driving the tech that they're pushing is just like severely troubled, right? It's like this bootloader idea. It's like this idea that consciousness is something that can be taken out of these corrupt and finite bodies and put into a silicone machine body where we could live forever, ostensibly. And there's a lot of assumptions baked into that that I think are really naive. Um, so I think protecting the sanctity of what it means to be human by not allowing this anthropomorphic AI, all the bots, to really like steal our attachment because there's a simultaneous rise in using more technology and AI chatbots and scrolling. As that rises, our togetherness decreases, right? There's more isolation and there's more social atrophy. So it actually becomes scary to leave your house and go try to connect with people. And if nobody knows how to connect, yet the system can sustain itself, that's the madness about it, is that we figured out a way to stay alive without the requirement of intimate interpersonal relationships. I'm going to end it there.
Okay, well, great job. So that was like beautifully articulated. I want to try and contribute something of my own here to sort of reinforce and strengthen what I hear you pointing to and where we could take this from here. I think like a lot of people who might watch this would have a pretty clear sense that all is not quite right in the world, and that there are, you know, it's kind of going to hell in a handbasket. I think this is like not foreign to most people. Um, I think like what you did was you tied it to this like sociological shift, which has been underway for the past like several thousand years of people moving toward an atomized way of living out of the tribe and to start living more alone. You should have talked about the meta crisis in the context of that sociological shift. Um, and from there, like what I noticed was what I want to talk about is like why retribalizing again is so important. Like what is it that's valuable about that? And we could talk about that in terms of like the consequences of the meta crisis. Like, oh, we might actually all die because of, engineered bioweapons or from nuclear risks or AI risks, or there's a whole panoply of existential risks that are called the meta crisis, roughly speaking. And we could talk about how the meta crisis shows up in terms of our health. Like when people live alone, they're much more lonely, much more susceptible to addictions through technology, addictions through pharmacology, so on, like that. Um, we can talk about it like culturally. Like this is the inner dimension of the meta crisis is what Viveki has called the meaning crisis, right? The sense that people have very different sort of overarching frames of how to make sense of the world. Like we don't have a sort of common basis of unity anymore, which we did have when we all sort of believed in the same God, for example. And this atomizing of the way that people experience life in the world uh, leads a lot of people to experience meaninglessness. It's not only aloneness and loneliness, but also meaninglessness. Excuse me. I'm just gonna like move. Thought this place was empty, but I'm gonna move out of that person's way and keep going. So where I wanted to go from there was, yeah, so there's like, there's rough framings that we know about the meaning crisis and meta crisis, right? But then and we sort of talked about some of the consequences, like in terms of what that does to people's health and well-being. And there's that really important point that you made that I wanted to sort of fasten on, that like the consequences of this kind of technological development are new since World War II. Like for the first time ever, we have the power to blow ourselves off the planet. And so there's a kind of existential risk, a threat to human survivability that comes up for the first time. Um, so this is like a threat to our direct humanity at the same time as all these advancements in uh, AI technology and like ways to be addicted basically compromise the core of our sort of moral humanity, not just our like survivability, but what it actually means to be a human being is being corrupted by these techno-fascists essentially and the technologies that they're addicting us to. And so in that context, like there's a sense that I have that it's not just about like how can we live the healthiest and happiest lives in the context of all of that. Like we can talk about how, oh, if you get into a tribe again, you're literally like happier as a person and like you have people around you all the time and this makes you less susceptible to addiction and like that. It's like, wow, that sounds like a much better way to live for a lot of people. But I think what's also important about that shift is that it actually allows us to make better sense of the world, make better decisions in that world, and exercise a greater agency in terms of like trying to clean up all the issues that we created as a result of like implementing capitalism everywhere, roughly speaking. Um, so like rather than perpetuating these sort of extraction and pollution dynamics uh, in the environment everywhere, if we shift toward retribalization, there's an incentive toward how can we work out how to basically use less. Um, but why don't we talk about that a bit? Like what I'm talking about here is I would like to talk about it in terms of sense making, which is a bit of a buzzword. But what I'm sort of saying is, again, there's this point about collective intelligence. When you get people into a group, like a tribe or like a team, they find it much easier to solve very difficult problems, and they make far less mistakes when they do so, far fewer mistakes. And our brains are also designed to be in tribe, to be in community. We're actually not fully human if we're on our own all the time. We actually become stupider and less wise, and our brains don't have the people around us that their development expects. And what that sort of implies is obviously we can recognize that the world around us is incredibly complex. Without there even being a meta crisis or a meaning crisis, the world is already incredibly complex. In order to like make sense of that world and to work out what to do in 2026, it's really, really helpful to have shared sense making practices, to be around each other in such a way that we can make sense together. I mean, it's a little bit monological, but it's kind of like what we're doing here. The idea of having a conversation about what the heck is going on and what to do about it is in some ways much more reliable source of sense making than just one person on their own. So I want to throw it back to you by asking you, how do you see the connection between not just retribalizing to feel better and to feel good and to be healthier, but retribalizing to make better sense?
Hmm. Yeah, that seems like a really important thing to explore. And I very much feel like I'm feeling the detriments of not having a tribe. And I'm remembering living more in a communal setting and how I would often reflect on how much smarter I felt and sharper and confident and wise. And I think like there's a really strong sense of satisfaction when your uniqueness, your unique authenticity can really be present and be really shining through. And I think as an individual, as a human in the cosmos, like that might be one of the most rewarding experiences. Um, so Yeah, you're saying the connection between like being in tribe and then sense making.
Can I circle you about that for a minute? I feel like there's something important
Yeah.
that I'm trying to draw out. You're sort of saying that when you get to be in tribe with other people, hang out with them and try and make sense of the world together, it allows you to connect with a part of yourself that feels more honest, that feels more like who you really are. So there's maybe less inhibition or you're putting on less of a face, you know? Help me understand that a bit more. Like, what is it about being with other people and making sense together with them that allows that?
I feel that um we come into being in the context of relationships. If I'm alone, I don't really have any sort of stimuli in my environment that draws my authenticity out of me. So it stays kind of like a bit dormant and within. And of course, we're born with need. Biology that expects to be in an atmosphere and to inhale and exhale. We're born with different social needs. And so I think like obviously in the absence of that, we turn towards our screens to try to make up for that. Um, but it's quite impossible, you know. It's like trying to eat air or something or fake food. Um, and so yeah, I found that being in context with other people, and it doesn't really matter what the practice was. I mean, it does make a difference what the practice is, but ultimately, like being in circle with other humans and having a chance to share my perspective and feeling it impact others and also feeling it be shaped by others to kind of form this full human. Like I feel like a skin cell or a heart cell isn't a skin cell or a heart cell unless it gets to be a part of a full body. So in that same way, I feel like you were saying, we're not fully human unless we're a part of this more tribal structure. Yeah, just community organism because it has it has an emergent kind of like beingness to it. And I think that that collective being expresses itself uniquely through different people. So that constellation, like I'm not just me, I'm like an emergent expression of this thing that happens when we come together with other people.
Yeah, it seems like you're drawing out like really two things there, if I heard you right, is that like, firstly, just by virtue of being around other people, like literally just being in the same vicinity as other people, it allows us to be, in a sense, more involved in life together. There's a way that when we're on our own, like the understanding that we have of like what's going on in the world and what to do about it is like implied or implicit. It's like literally like hidden. It's not out in the open. And so there's a way that when we're on our own, our sense making is sort of behind us. It's kind of in the background. It's much more easy to not only deceive ourselves, but to not bring our sense making practices to the front and be able to actually look at the way that we're making sense of the world. So, but there's something about being with other people that allows us to try and make sense together, right? And literally, just even if we're not even trying to make sense together, even if we're just having a conversation, right? Just by virtue of being around other people, our sense making is drawn out of us, is educed, you could say. And what that allows, I'm noticing the connections there to metacognition, right? It allows us to look at our own thinking much more easily. It allows us to reflect on what our own cognitive biases might be, the way that our own life history and social contexts might be conditioning the way that we experience the world. Much more easy to look at that kind of thing and so make better sense together when we're actually around other people. It seems like the second thing is you were saying that being around other people actually allows us to um, feel much more aligned with our own sense of purpose. It's like, again, the analogies from the body are really helpful here. Like, There are many different kinds of cells in the body, liver cells and red blood cells and neurons and so on. And each of them is able to like fully complete their own task, fill their own role when they participate in a higher order structure, namely the body. Whereas if one cell type is just on its own, it can't create the kind of organs that we need in order to function. There's something about like uh being with other people, like in imagine that you're one type of cell and I'm another type of cell. Something about being together with other people who are different from you that allows you to fit more deeply in to uh the best and highest expression of who you are. So there's something about like just by bouncing off with someone else that allows one to tune in to oneself, to the core of one's own being, and to try to express from that place and feel connected with that place. Um, it seems like what you're saying is that not only do we feel that, but when we can connect with that, it actually allows us to be more like to share more honestly, to be more open with each other, to be more vulnerable with each other, to be more upfront about what our own biases might be, to be less defensive, And so, and that's supportive of actually finding truth, right? Making sense of the world. Um, why is it supportive of that? Because if we can be much more deeply connected with the truth, like our own truth, right? Our authenticity or whatever is real to us, then we can kind of lay out all those cards on the table. We get caught up far less in being triggered by each other or trying to impress each other or whatever like that. We're just trying to honestly make sense of the world together. So it's a much purer and more refined sense making practice when we can actually be around each other in that way. And so I want to keep going with the analogies from here. Like I really like the symbols that you use. Is there anywhere that feels like a natural development to take the conversation from here? I would sort of say, I guess my faith is at this point, and like what I know is that this like sociological shift that we're talking about is kind of already happening. There are already people with high risk tolerance, right, and who are young and who realize that being addicted to technology and to all the drugs from big pharma and from living alone is not really a healthy way to live. And so these people are already oriented toward retribalizing, and we're sort of trying to make that more available to the mainstream. And that's sort of the edge at the moment. So it's a shift that's already happening. But my faith is sort of that the right kinds of responses to the global crisis that many people are already experiencing, as we've laid out, the right kind of response to that emerges from those contexts of new tribes. It's like the way I put it is that the sooner we bring about the tribes of the future, the sooner that we can clean up the mess. It seems like trying to adjust existing institutions that are like deeply broken or trying to fix the problem all on our own is not likely to be very successful. So the best thing that we could do is find a group of aligned people, get together, make a tribe or a team together, and then try and solve some real problems in the world. What do you think
Hmm.
about that it's like a way of orienting to the meta crisis and the mini crisis through tribes, through highly aligned teams?
Yeah, I'm curious around this question of how effective you can be at affecting the system from being in tribe. Because it seems like if you were to be fully disentangled from the current economic system and living in tribe, um, you wouldn't have money to be able to have optionality and then have more, you know, I guess just like a bigger voice. So I'm curious around this question of like when I hear you say find a tribe, and the sooner we do that, the sooner we can clean up the mess. How much does cleaning up the mess involve us still being in the current structure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it definitely does. I mean, we're all privileged, we're all guilty, we're all participating in capitalism, right? And we don't need people to completely remove themselves I like it. It's great if people want to go off grid, right? But we're trying to have as big an impact as we can so that we can shift the overall arc of humanity kind of thing. Because like literally human survival is at stake. It's not a time to um completely remove oneself and go meditate in a cave for an entire lifetime. Although, hats off to the monks that want to do that. And the reason is because everything's interconnected, right? There's no possible way to detach yourself from the world. We're all on the one planet. And so it's kind of like Bucky Fuller's analogy of like operating spaceship Earth, right? We're running a giant spaceship and it's planet Earth. And it's not a spaceship, it's a planet. And we're trying to care like overall for the health of that planet by thinking globally but acting locally. And that involves, yes, there are ways of, I think, at the moment, until the people get around to developing an entirely new economic system, which is not exactly my field of expertise, we're going to have to be participating in capitalism, because that's the way that the world works at the moment. And so I'm not talking about completely removing oneself from the system, quote unquote. I'm talking about as much as possible trying to participate in that system in a different way. And I think the it's the kind of bottom-up shift. Like what I'm saying is that the way that we choose to live deeply conditions our consciousness, and can that way of living can give rise to better and healthier economic systems if we give it some time. But I don't think that's one of the first pieces to shift. I think it's one of the deepest pieces to shift. Um, does that kind of make sense? It's what I'm saying is, yes, we have to participate in capitalism inevitably. There are ways to do that minimize our consumption, but I don't think that can be avoided. But that doesn't take away from the incentive to create highly aligned teams and to live in tribes again, because whether it's through dystopia or a utopia, we're going to be happier and healthier when we do that. Either to survive together and make sense of the world together, or because we actually just prefer to hang out with a lot of people. Um, in a world of abundance or in a world of scarcity, tribes seem to me to be the way that people are going to live in the future. And the sooner we do that, uh, it seems to me the sooner we can bring about the solutions that we need.
Yeah, I'm just worried about this correlation between the axis of abundance and scarcity, and then the axis of isolation and tribal intimacy. Being that it seems like what bonded people, the forcing function that bonded humans to stick together was that was the only way that they could survive. And so I'm wondering if we need some sort of like binding agent like that, or if it's possible to choose to be together, and if that's what's being asked of us, because I've heard of so many intentional communities that have failed and gone wrong in so many different ways. Um, and I think having the option to return to being just a wage cuck individual and make your ends meet that way, that option will always be an easy way out from sorting out conflict, or from just this idea of being kind of paralyzed by the amount of choice that there is. There's so many people out there, so it's like, oh, how do I know if these are my people, right? I don't know. I feel like my people are somewhere else, and it's like you can just keep doing that. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of forecasts say that there's going to be some sort of great simplification or tipping point where we just cannot keep going as we are. And it's like, is that what it's going to take to really force people back into tribes? And I don't want to wait. I totally want to do something and live the most meaningful life I can, which my heart is drawn towards being with a group of people that feel passionately about aiding some sort of issues. And yeah, just making an impact of, yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, but being unified with a team around some sort of meaningful set of goals.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
let's
unfortunately, the last thing I'll say is I think unfortunately, like in the absence of like healthy, meaningful, unifying objectives for groups of people, people find meaning in like tech startups that are good at making money, and that becomes the superficial goal. They're good at making money, and that's what our system like explicitly defines as success. So people are trying to fill that need by actually making the world worse in so many cases. Back to you.
I want to ground this even more. Like it seems like what you're sort of drawing out is that in a world where a lot of the actions of everyday people are making the world worse, sort of by accident, a big part of making the world better is just to not make it any more worse. And like doing less can look like can be more in that context. I want to say like I want to ground it in what we could actually do at the moment at this particular stage of the process. So imagine that we go to this residency program together, which I think we will do. We could present sort of like some of this material um, about meta crisis and about meaning crisis, right? But I think I want to ground it in actual sense making practices because we can sort of go straight to the ecology of practices and do some circling, do some authentic relating, do some rebirthing breath work, do some qigong and so on. But when it comes down to it, people are practical. People want uh, something that actually helps them to make sense of the world and make better decisions. So imagine like I'm imagining like sitting in a circle with a group of people, right? And we take um, one issue or problem that is like very much not just like political and opinionated, but something that's like actually affecting people's health in that moment, or the one way that the meta crisis is showing up in that room at the moment. Like there's a way of like I want to focus it on one particular problem, and then try to sense make together about that. So imagine, for example, the microplastics issue. So wherever we would happen to be sitting, probably we're going to be getting microplastics into our food and into our water, and through the clothes that we're all wearing. And what we could do is simply sort of take that issue and have 5 people research about microplastics for 10 minutes. And we could get um, each of those 5 people to research um, a different aspect of that issue. Like, what is the impact of microplastics on the environment? Like, maybe one person could look at heavy metals, one person could look at microplastics, one person could look at um, the forever chemicals, and we could look at like the different ways that they show up in our life. And then each person after that 10-minute period, like presented for about 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Imagine that each person presented for 2 minutes and then they spent 1 minute talking about what the biases of the research that they did might be, or where they might be misaligned. Um, and then, so like that would be 10 minutes and 10 minutes. So that's like 20 minutes, say 25 minutes. Then imagine for the next chunk of time, um, we sort of try to draw out what the implications of all the research together might be. Like what are the main points for putting that into action? Like what are the main interventions that we could make in that particular moment to, for example, prevent microplastics exposure in the environment? That might be like one like imagine that takes like less than 45 minutes or less than an hour, for example. Um, I think like the key point that I would say there about sense making is that it's a way of like taking different perspectives that each might be relevant or truthful on the same topic and trying to synthesize them by steel manning. So it would be a way to take some different perspectives on, is it important to actually get microplastics out of your food and water? And why is that important? And what are some interventions that could be made that could easily reduce exposure very quickly? Um, you could find an issue that would be a little bit more controversial or a little bit less obvious, like what to do, because then it might be more apparent why having a multitude of different perspectives could be valuable. Um,
Yeah,
What do you think about that as an example?
I really love that. And I think that it gets very crowded and complex in my mind trying to think about that because it seems like there needs to be a lot of preamble and like setting the context around like let's say there was an issue of Israel and Palestine. It's like in the first place, should we do sense making about like why we should care about this issue? Like, what is the value of caring about something that's global versus should we just be focusing on what's more local? Um, and the sense making process on that itself, like asking more meta questions before we like move fully into a topic. And then, having guidelines. I love the perspective seeking, taking analysis and synthesis um, that I've heard Daniel flesh out. And, warm data really comes to mind because it really helps. It seems like sense making practices, the way I was hearing you flesh that out, I was like, oh, that also orients us towards the gestalt of realization of being in a web of life. That like microplastics don't just like start here and then end in my body. It's like there's a flow of information, you know, like you dump the pollutants out like in the river and then it goes down and it's affecting all of the life and organisms it's coming in contact with. And each one of those organisms are in relationship with other organisms that are in relationship with other organisms. So you see this just spread of microplastics through the whole ecology of the biosphere to the point where, it's being detected in rainfall all around the world into Antarctica where there's no humans and no civilization. So I think there's something fundamental about like rejoining the web of life instead of trying to be like on top of this pyramid as like king of earth. But it's like, no, like the wisdom from the Tao Te Ching of like um going low because gravity brings all rivers down to the ocean. Like if we could somehow be the stewards by being like, I don't know, underneath everything. I like that visual better than being like on top and dominating, but being
Hmm.
like a foundational, like upholding to different values of beauty and biodiversity and things like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, I guess like the sense making on like, all right, what do we choose to sense make on? Like, what is sense making in the first place? Why is it valuable? And then we move into like, all right, let's sense make on this. And let's have certain guidelines of like, I love Schmachtenberger's blog about like the guidelines that tend to support healthy dialogue, right? Just like reminders of that because it's so easy to slip into schismogenesis and start bumping heads and like this tenseness that creates more of a violent interaction and conflict and just degenerative argument. Um, yeah, just the wisdom of like not knowing. Like we don't fucking know what's going on. Some people do more research than others, and that's fair. They should have more authority, but like ultimately, like we all just need to fucking chill. Anyways, I'm getting maybe too much into the weeds, but maybe that's what you wanted to like to ground it. I don't know. It sounds really exciting to me for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really resonate with all of that. So it seems like there are some sort of practices that underlie sense making, like uh, coming back to humility, in recognition of the complexity, the fragility, and the interconnectedness of life. Imagine that we presented a couple of case studies where people thought that they had made sense, but actually the model that they'd created was not enough to encompass all of reality. And so when they went to create stuff, uh, it ended up making a bigger problem. Like a good one is like um, engine knocking in gasoline, right? Like they were like, oh, great, we found a better solution than horse and carriage. Like we'll make automobiles and that'll like solve the problem. It's like, oh, but then it created a bigger problem, which is climate change. Or when, yeah, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I should say it created a bigger problem. It put all this lead into the environment and
Yeah.
then that affected people's health in a big way. So the point that I'm making is that uh, when we can come back to recognize the space between the models that we create to make sense of the world, the perspectives that we take, um, and the world itself, like reality, quote unquote, then there's a way of recognizing the mystery. There's a way of recognizing the complexity. and also the tangled, fragile, interconnected web of life and existence that we've been uh, granted the sacred responsibility of stewarding. And when we can look at that, like for example, if we look at how frogs are so delicately affected by the presence of heavy metals in the environment, right? And so frogs are used as an indicator species by many different scientists to talk about the health of ecologies, because when all the frogs die, it's an indication that things might not go well in the future. Or like another example would be like if you look at how, again, like heavy metals bioaccumulate toward the predators at the top of the food chain. Well, that means that most of the birds of prey, the shells of all their eggs keep breaking because the heavy metal really compromises the um, calcium, I think, in the shells. It's like, oh, life is actually a very fragile and complex web. Um, but also with people, right? Like there are ways of looking at things like, oh, why, what is like, for example, if you take one of the wars that are happening in the world, well, like what is war and like why does it happen? Well, like a really good example is, oh, well, if there are huge climate changes in the world, then there end up being resource shortages that lead to a resource war, and that's like behind a lot of the reasons why people go to war in the first place. Um, what I'm trying to draw out here is like examples that show the interconnected web of all things. And if we can get in touch with that, then we sort of unlock more humility in our epistemology. We sort of recognize that a lot of the way that we continue to make sense of the world is very flawed and very partial, and it's very easy to break stuff. And I think like seeing that can bring people into a much gentler attitude, an attitude that can like we still need to make decisions and do stuff, but we're maybe less inclined to run fast and break things, and more inclined to go slow and heal and repair things in a way that hopefully uses less energy as well. Um, and I also had just briefly that you were talking about like not only getting in touch with humility and like recognizing clearly the complexity and fragility of the world, but you were talking about sharing these protocols or principles that are like meta epistemics. Like they're principles by which we can understand that sense-making processes usually go better. Um, so I mentioned one of them before, the practice of steel manning. This way of using the skill of steel manning to literally like repeat back what the last person said, but in a way that makes the strongest version of their position. So rather than getting into an argument with someone and creating a straw man of what they just said, we implement some of the principles and practices that can allow us to then make sense more easily. Does that make sense?
Does that make sense?
I might also stop this soon because I'm needing to move out of the way. Um, Actually, I could probably, I think it's okay for the moment. And I then wanted to say,
Yeah,
like, I just have one other thing which I felt like sharing was that, like,
sure.
earlier we were sort of talking about like which topics to make sense of and why, right? Like it's not just about like trying to make sense of any random topic that we think of. It's like um the way I would put it is sort of that like when we can gather into a tribe again, there's sort of space which is in the middle, which is sort of between everyone, which is in a way we could talk about that as the commons, and there's something sacred about that. There's a way that like when we, for example, when we take any one topic, when we're sitting in a circle, right, we take one topic. In a way, we're putting that topic in the middle. We're putting that into a sacred space, which is between all of us. Why is it sacred? Because what we give our attention to, like, indicates what we find most valuable and most important, first of all. Um, and secondly, I think what I want to say about that is like the relevance of each of the topics that we might do sense making about is that each of those topics relates to the way that we experience life and the world, right? So there's a way that like the reason that I was talking about microplastics, for example, is because microplastics are right here and right now, even if they seem like an abstract topic that's not actually that relevant. It's like, no, that's actually in our bodies at this moment. Um, the same way with for example, the archetype of war. Like I might think of that in connection with the Greek phrase philia Nikeia, the love of victory, rather than the philia Sophia, the love of wisdom, philosophy. And so there's a way that that archetype of war can show up in a dialogue right now, having to do with the love of victory, where we care more about winning points against each other rather than actually making sense. So what I'm saying is that when we get into the shape of a tribe, that circle and making sense together with the sacredness of the space between us, there's a way of um, there's a way of holding any topic in such a way that it intersects with that sacredness. We can ground like the space between us is the ground, is um, the stable platform upon which any topic has its relevance. And so there's a way of like whatever topic we want to talk about, part of the sense making about that topic is grounding it back down into how is that affecting us right now in this moment. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yes, yes. And I think that's a great practice because um, a pitfall, a pitfall detour is like things becoming too abstract when you're talking about them. So instead of just like getting lost in these mazes, these tangential mazes, it's like, how do we bring back more awareness to the body and embodiment? And like, no, in this room with us right now, in our felt sense, like more, and it feels like it could change like where we're speaking from too. But I don't know, it's a great practice. And I think like having really solid foundational tenets, things like the first verse of the Tao, where like the map isn't the territory, basically. Like whatever the topic is, a topic isn't really the territory. A topic is just like plucking one thing out in isolation so that we can focus on it. And there's something about the limits to our cognitive mind where we can't really grok the whole web of life. Like we can like at a deeper level, but at the level of like talking about stuff, it's inherently kind of like linear. So we need to know that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And like starting, yeah, having certain starting points. Like, are we all in consensus that we want the love of wisdom instead of the love of victory? Are we all in service to coherence of the whole instead of like posturing or competing or whatever it is?
Hmm.
Um,
There's something really important there. I would like to talk about this in connection with men's work. I think I noticed that, and I know as an empirical fact that men find it much harder to be open and vulnerable with each other than women do, either with each other or um, men also find it much easier to be open and vulnerable with women. So I'm talking particularly between men. I noticed this like huge opportunity to talk about the unmet needs that we have. And so, for example, if we can open up topics that are about shame and about fear and about guilt, topics like self-loathing. Like what I'm sort of saying is that by opening this up, like as an example, um, a lot of men were taught that they have to achieve something in order to be worthy of love, when in reality, they're worthy of love just by existing before doing anything. And if we can, like one way of actually starting a sense making practice, now that I'm thinking of it, would be to ask each person to share very briefly about how that topic resonates with them. And then what we would do actually is try to connect with the sense of fullness. So rather than coming from a place of scarcity where we feel as if we have to win the conversation or we feel that we have to impress the other people in order to feel that we're enough, we can actually start by coming from a place of abundance, a place of already having enough, already being enough. And that
mm,
I think like there's a certain when we can be vulnerable in the right way with each other, and when we can I think actually just breathe like 3 to 5 deep breaths and connect with that sense of fullness within us. It can actually allow different kind of sense making to come forwards. Because I noticed that like a lot of sense making between men can easily become like an ego competition, right? Where we want to say the next thing or we want to say like we want to different ways of getting all the attention or making a point or being right. None
Having
of
the
which
deeper
are,
insight.
yeah, which are, yeah, exactly. Um, so I think just like m making space to talk about the way that we, the way that we actually make sense with each other and to talk about the ways that that can be derailed could itself be really valuable.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that was I'm really actually wanting to do this on Jake Faber's site. So maybe like we should start hosting them however often. But I'd love to just like start getting a group to practice this.
Yeah.
Because if we can do it online, then like we might as well. Um, yeah, I think it could be really cool to like actually write down some tenets and then, warm data is like one. And then there's also cafe conversations. But I really think that there's good creativity in like terms of what you were talking about with like picking a topic and maybe coming like a little bit prepared and then like sharing different perspectives and steel manning different ideas and then looking for it. Like maybe we could do an exercise like that right now, right? Like what's let's pick a topic and then see how we could find it, like in the room where we're at, like in our direct awareness.
Does anything come up if you consider that?
I mean, I thought of slave labor, but that maybe seems like an easy one. Um,
What I thought of actually is the space that we're in when we sense make with each other. So what I'm talking about is the way that for example, if we stand up and go outside and go for a walk together as a way of making sense, that this is a very different way of actually making sense with each other than if we are both sitting down and we're both inside, because those contexts are literally like conditioning our consciousness in real time. It's kind of similar as what it's like to be on a train. I don't know if anyone else ever experiences that, but I really love being on trains because it's kind of like it gives you a sense of going forwards. You know what I mean? Because you're literally carried
hmm.
forwards by the train. Well, in the same way, like if we're walking along together, we have a sense of like doing something together, right? And we're moving towards something together. And it's like a visceral, embodied, it's participatory awareness of going toward the same direction in our sense making. Um, Nietzsche said, "Don't trust any thoughts that come when you're sitting down." There's something deeply true about that, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that. And I'm also kind of contrasting that too with an idea of tree nets because I guess I've just thought that having a sense making session in a tree net would be really cool. Um, you're not necessarily moving, but you are in a way very tactile and like in trees, and so I think you're more viscerally in the web of life than you would be like inside of a dead matter dead matter room. Um, yeah, I really wanted to. It's interesting when you speak and there's like, oh, I want to bring this up, but there is some sort of like anti-flow I feel sometimes when it's my turn to speak, and it's like I can't hit all the points that I were coming up
It's hard.
while you while you were speaking. Yeah, but one thing was Ken Wilber talking about three different uh, levels of I don't know what he calls them actually, but there's like the physiosphere, which is like physical matter, and then there's the biosphere, and then there's the noosphere. And with these kind of like holons, the the more fundamental ones are come before, obviously. So like the our noosphere depends on the biosphere, which depends on the physiosphere. Um, but it felt like I don't know when, but the noosphere felt like relevant with I think maybe when you were saying like putting a topic in the middle. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to remember the relevance, but there was something about like breaking it down really simply and like having a sense of the sacred and that sacred informing us, like speaking to something in us that cares about life and about this whole universe experiment and becoming more of an agent to protect and perpetuate that thing. Um,
Can I ask you about that? Like, I resonate with
yeah,
what you're saying, this sort of like three-layer stack of like all the infrastructure and material that our world is made out of, and all the like roughly social agreement fields and institutions that comprise our like uh living together, right? But then there's also the space of mind and collective mind, like the ideas or the culture or the philosophy or the religion or the spirituality that is sort of guiding and shaping our cognition and our character. And I want to like you describe that as the noosphere following Ken Wilber. And that like resonates with me, and I guess I'm asking like I also resonate with the piece about our humanity because like thinkers from sort of Heidegger and then going into cybernetic theory through Hubert Dreyfus have talked about how our care in Heidegger's Sorge, I think I'm not sure how to pronounce the German here, but the point is that our care is very core to our humanity, right? And that the one thing that artificial intelligence cannot do is care because it's not embodied, it's not alive, it's not um fragile and like easily breakable in the way that we are, and it doesn't experience beauty and meaning and purpose and inspiration in the way that we do to care about our life and about each other and about the world. And so what I'm saying is that care is core to our humanity, to our sense of who we actually are. It's not just an emotion, it's like a place to come from. Like our entire being, existentially speaking, is grounded in care. Um, if that kind of makes sense. Care as a come from, not as a feeling. Care is something that we move out of all the time. Um, what I want to ask is about the connection between these. What do you feel is the like because you brought them up and you linked them together, and I want to investigate that a bit more. Like when you're talking about the noosphere and our collective mind, and in terms of this like shared sense making practices, for example, um, how is how is that connected to care as an attitude or as a come from in that kind of a practice space? Does that make sense as a question? I think so.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure if I brought them up with them two having something in common. Well, what they had in common was they were both thoughts that came up, and I'm not sure that they had such a connection to each other. Although I think the question is important,
I think
and
they
I just
super
want to
can
trust
though.
that. Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt you, but I think they're like deeply interconnected, right? Because I sort of connected this. We were sort of talking about a shared sense making space in relation to this the commons, which is between us, which is like an empty vessel into which we place any topic that we might like to sense make about, right? And it's like there's a quality of sacredness that can be attributed to it because it's easy to neglect, and so it deserves to be held up. You know, it's like the lowest point to which all the water flows, as you were saying from the Tao, right? And therefore, that lowest point is in some way, it's the commons, which we can hold up as something that's sacred to all of us because it's something that we all depend on and rely on and ground ourselves in. And another thing that's sort of sacred about it is that like when we devote our very limited resources to it in terms of our energy, our attention, our time, then it possesses an importance by virtue of that. It's worth purifying and holding up as something amazing because we're giving ourselves to it. Um, and so what I want to say about that is that um, like there's this that's essentially the space of the collective mind. In this way, like a shared sense-making commons is kind of like uh, it's kind of like a digital campfire, right? It's like something between us, between all of us, that can hold anything that we put into it. Um, and so what I'm saying is that if we can approach that place, if we can comport ourselves toward that central commons with the appropriate attitude, that the results are going to be very different, right? And so this is where we can tie it to the sense of care, right? We know from people like McGilchrist and others that the way that you pay attention to the world changes what you find. So if we can show up with this attitude of devotion, an attitude of deep listening, an attitude of care for what is happening in our world, then it actually makes available a kind of sense making which would not otherwise be accessible to us. So I'm sort of talking about the way that care unlocks something, it affords something that is not otherwise possible. So, like as an example, if we can take a minute at the start of our sense making practice to ongoingly connect with that which we care for, the sacredness of our life, the sacredness of the land around us, how blessed we feel to be with each other, and we connect with those qualities, well, it gives us a different attitude, gives us a different come from. It makes us far more aware and present to the preciousness and the fragility and the responsibility of governing that and safeguarding it that leads to a very different kind of sense making in terms of like what we care about and what to do, what's reasonable to orient toward.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very much kind of landing on the first principles, first values conversation about where does care come from and the idea of it being more anthropocentric of like humans wanting to perpetuate humanity versus there's some sort of deeper intelligence that has like a sacred desire, which we are extensions of. And we are like in the utmost humility, one of the more advanced life forms that it's produced, and that there might not be any way to prove it ultimately, besides maybe some deep sense of knowingness or resonance that still is like up in question whether that's objectively true. But I think it becomes a lot more sacred when we are not living our lives for ourselves, but in service to something deeper and bigger and greater that's going on here. And so that care actually is an extension of a primordial care of God or whatever.
Source or
That
life or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
yeah, that has like a vested interest in the continuity of life, and I'll say vessels for consciousness to incarnate into. Like I would absolutely guess that a human has more depth for beauty and love and things that just yeah, things that make life worth living, right? More we have more of a capacity for that than a dog or a frog or a clog or a rock. But of course, like I don't know, as we get further away from what we are, it becomes harder to intuit what their interiority might be like. Under the assumption that panpsychism, that like a rock is conscious and that like sand is conscious or whatever, the geosphere. But I think there's an important point that those folks get at of value being fundamental in the universe. Like I think that something that has driven us towards more threats to life has been um, the loss of um like religious axioms or like wisdom lineages, spiritual tradition axioms and having that be replaced with science and reduction, which obviously like has been pretty dominant and is failing us like really terribly. So I think like in response to that, it's like we encounter different experiences of the sacred if we're lucky. And you have to be really lucky, I think, in today's world. Most people are just uninitiated Muslims, right? Not walking around. So I don't know. I definitely like I land on this sense of not knowing, but wanting to have a meaningful experience of being here. And there's something about the intersection between pursuing the most meaningful experience and learning about the meta crisis and the time we're in and seeking to like, the noosphere came into mind because I was thinking like, yeah, the economic system like isn't your expertise nor mine. Really what I see that the the game plan mission is about is like spreading ideas, like without having hubris, feeling like we've stumbled upon really important ideas that have the power to like shift humanity. And in one sense, that ecological cognitive the cognitive ecological awakening through sense making practices. Um, yeah, fundamentally like changing the noosphere because like
Yeah.
I think that the more advanced life forms are more fragile than the fundamental ones.
Mm.
So like the biosphere is more fragile than the physiosphere, and the noosphere is more fragile than the biosphere. But the noosphere has at this point more power because if like atomic bombs are a product of kind of the noosphere being like our ability for abstract thinking and tech tool making. Um, it feels like you and I are drawn towards like noosphere work.
Yeah, so I think like to me, you're sort of connecting our sense making practices and like what we talked about is the intersection of like the epistemic commons or like in connection with the noosphere, the collective sort of mind space of humanity, and the sacredness of that, and the attitude with which we can comport ourselves toward that in terms of this existential quality of care. We sort of went from there to talk about what this moment is for humanity existentially, and the way that like we're talking about sense making practices in connection with recognizing, deeply recognizing what's actually going on, who we actually are. So we're talking about remembering who we are at a very deep level, not just as individuals, right? But in a way, as I would describe, sort of like we are organs of consciousness for the sake of the whole of the earth, right? We're sort of we're conscious on behalf of everything. And there's a way that we're just by existing, we're in service. We're in service to the whole. And I think like waking up to that as a sacred gift, like the amazing gift that is our miraculous life, and being with that, it can allow us it can allow us to feel a lot more deeply rooted within our own life, right? And connected with what's actually meaningful and what's actually important, um, and to draw upon that as a kind of resource. And but it's a resource which is within us, and it's funny like what you're talking about. It does uh, influence the sort of collective mind space. Like we're sharing memes right now, but it's not exactly that either. It's not just about bits of information. It's like, to me, I've talked about this in terms of uh, extended awareness or collective awakening. And I want to try and talk about like what do we mean by that? It's not just about making sense together so as to have a better understanding of the world. It's making sense together so as to come to a deeper sense of awareness of who we are and what's going on. And again, I think the kind of the faith that I have is that that source, which is our source of inspiration, that comes through all people, right? The source of inspiration, to put it that way. It's something which shapes and guides our lives, even if we're not conscious of that. Um, can't see your face, just so you know. And
Oh, really?
what I wanted to say about that is that um, there's a way that when we can connect with the source of life as a kind of guiding intelligence, that's not God exactly, although some people conceive of it as God, perhaps. I think it's sort of closer to the Platonic world soul, but anyway, that aside, like I'm sort of talking about the way that we can wake up to ourselves as the earth. So like what I'm saying is that our identities right now, our way of experiencing the world is incredibly partial. Like we're in a story right now that we've been in for many thousands of years. That here's Sam over here, and there's Benny over there, and there's maybe someone watching this, and they're somewhere inside their head, and they're presumably watching this on a computer or a laptop, right, which is in the middle of the entire environment or surrounding that they're in. And we think that like we are in these little head bubbles, or that these people are these shapes on the screen, and we're not the rest of it. And that's actually a lie. That's actually not true because what are we without the air? What are we without the trees? What are we without the sun? What are we without the water? You know, what are we without the fire that is the life of the conversation that has a life of its own and that takes hold of us, which the Greeks call the logos? What are we without that? And so what I'm sort of talking about here is that there's a way of recognizing that we are everything that is around us. It's actually an extension of our own body, to put it that way, because our body is uh, a whole set of like organs that are extremely sensitive to take in and take stuff out of us. Um, this is the way that our body is that which interfaces with the world, obviously. And what I'm saying is that like it's possible through sense making of this kind to come to an awareness as the earth or as the world. And that kind of recognition can allow us to hold the jewel or the vessel of our awareness of everything around us with a different kind of um with a different kind it is care, I guess, but it's like when we recognize that it's actually who we are, it's not just something that we're tasked to care for, it's actually us, it's actually our body. um the the consequences of that recognition, uh I don't think we know what they really are.
And what do you think it's like to identify as that, to experience that and be within that story? Um, I also want to shout out Bill Plotkin's map of psychological development, and how he referenced someone who was protecting a rainforest in Australia, and he wasn't a human protecting the rainforest. He identified as the rainforest protecting itself, which I thought was a pretty profound frame. And so, like, yeah, I could cognitively understand how I'm part of this interdependent web and that there's like a biome around me locally. Um, but I still feel separate maybe. And so what is it actually like? Because it feels like it will require quite a profound shift in like your qualia, like in the all the blanks of your experience, like right now. It feels like, there's a kind of underlying sense of what it feels like to be conscious. And it feels like that would be different.
Yeah, I think I don't want to get too mystical with it. I think it's like it's important to ground this back into ongoing practices that can support like a shared way of life, right? That we've talked about sense making practices, and I think I would add in like meditation and contemplation practices here, um, as well as kinds of meditation that are more about loving kindness, right? Connecting us with that quality of care. Like where we can open up these moments of deeply recognizing the truth of our inner being, the truth of our nature as that we are, like I am because we are in a phrase. Um, that I am deeply interdependent on this complex interconnected web of reality, which is all around us. I think recognizing that um, doesn't have to be like permanent and ongoing all the time, although it can be. And I think this is why these like tribal contexts or the context of a team running an ecology of practices together is so valuable, I think, because it can actually maintain that sense ongoingly. But I think the relevance of it for me here was that by experiencing those flashes of recognition, we come to make sense differently. We come to make different decisions. We come to relate differently with each other. Like we actually live in a different way. We make different decisions about how to live and about what's important, and how to care for ourselves and care for the world. That feels to me like what's important.
Do you feel like all of those external doings are in service to an internal subjective experience?
It's not just internal and subjective. That's one of Wilber's quadrants. Um, it's certainly a way to connect with a deeper core essence of the internal and subjective. Um, but it's not just about that. It's about being aware of the our sense of connectedness, like experiencing our connectedness to the world more viscerally, more easily, which is not subjective because that connection is what John Vervaeke has called transjective. There's a quality of our relationship with the world which we participate in. It's not inside us exactly. It draws us out and into the world. So it's a
Right.
way
And yeah, I
of,
guess this
in
is
a
just like
sense, you know how
materials versus ideal.
yoga means yoke or bond, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's a kind of yoga in the sense that it's about drawing out or revealing, unveiling our connection, our bond with the world, with reality itself, and recognizing ourselves in that.
Oh shit. Are you there?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
cool.
honestly, this is a good place to leave it though. I feel like we covered a lot of different
Yeah,
territory and I feel like it's come to a natural sort of conclusion. I want to ask you at the end here, what does it mean to you to be able to share and talk about this kind of material together?
it means the world, supposedly. Um, I think yeah, it, I think the experience of suffering really drives us forward. And there's something so suffering spawns such compassion, and it's really painful to not experience meaningfulness. And I think that it makes it much more special, um, that I get to experience that sense of meaning here from talking about these things, because all I have really is my experience. And I know the deep pain, like I said, of not having meaning. So that's kind of my prayer for all sentient beings, is to, like, hopefully, like what this conversation is itself meaningful, but also in service to ensuring that as many people as possible can, not be in states of apathy or meaninglessness. Um, so I think, yeah, to ground it, it means playing my role in the grand tapestry of the unfolding of the universe, contributing to some sort of like pro God, pro life, pro evolution. What about you?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'll be able to follow that because that was pretty touching and coherent and good. I think yeah, I really appreciate this chance to reconnect with these central topics that feel like matter the most to me to talk about. Like it's sort of the most interesting and meaningful material that I could think of in a lot of ways. And so I feel that these kind of conversations really reconnect me with what's important and what's meaningful, what's significant about relationship, right? Like the whole purpose of being here is to be in service in this kind of way and make sense together and talk about how we want to keep making sense together. Um, it's inspiring and it's connecting and it's heartwarming and it centers me back in what's important to me and why it's important. So I feel very grateful to you. I feel very grateful that I'm able to express and create in the way that we have been, and I feel very committed to keep doing that in a way that uh, makes this possible for more people. So I also happen to think that this kind of sense making is a core and integral part of continuing to live at all for humanity. And this existence is like a sacred jewel of awesomeness. And it's just amazing, the miracle of life. And I feel very honored to be a part of it, and this kind of a practice is one way that I have found of praying and honoring that in a honoring that recognition of being honored by life by being here. So it's a way of,
Mhm.
in a sense, giving back to creation what's been given to me.
Mhm. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we'll end it there. It's a good place.